Well, welcome to another edition of Unplugged, two rather than three this week. H is enjoying a bit of a mid-season break, if you will, but certainly got a bit to go through after what was a very disappointing Sunday night, what is now looking like a semi-regular fixture, an Easter Sunday night clash with the Western Bulldogs. And last year we probably looked at our belting at the Dogs with disappointment, but felt that there were some mitigating factors. Probably not the case this time around. Just a very disappointing defeat from 17 points up to a 71-point loss, the second biggest loss that St Kilda have suffered under Ross Lyon, behind the Brisbane loss late last year, which was 85 points. And as I welcome you in, Nick, we've got a bit of a word cloud that we put together. We did ask on social media for a one-word comment to sum up that loss. And I'd be interested to know if we ask those people now, I mean, obviously that was an immediate reaction, whether they would agree with that. I mean, embarrassing, putrid, pathetic, disappointing, heartless. I mean, some of those ring true, insipid, shit, abysmal, heartbreaking. I can understand a lot of that, and I guess we have to own it. I mean, there have been people in the media that have come out and clipped us, and you've just got to cop that. I mean, you look at other games during the year where you can fly the flag and defend it. I guess that's what makes it disappointing. You just have to wear it. You have to accept that was a shit-house effort. It's not, as Ross said, you hope it's not in our DNA. We've obviously seen it a couple of times, but not regularly. But it probably goes to show what we mentioned against the Giants and against the Crows, that our senior players struggled a little bit and the kids were okay. And I guess we saw what happened against the Bulldogs. If the kids can't get up and the senior players aren't performing, that it can get very ugly very quickly.
Yeah. I mean, it was. I think the reality is, I think we can all get emotional after a bad loss and kind of lash out and all that sort of stuff. I think the reality is that I look back and I think back a few nights ago at that game, and while I think a lot of the anger has gone out of how I feel about it, I think the reality and the reaction still rings true. I think in that was just a bitterly disappointing performance. I don't think there's excuses for it. I think there are some potential reasons, and there's a bunch of things. There's some rumors around viruses and gastro and whatever going through the club throughout the week. There's obviously playing the Heat the week before in Adelaide. There's a bunch of other things, but the reality is we turned up in that first quarter. We played some pretty good footy in the first quarter. Like you said, we got to 17 points up. We were dominating in periods through that first kind of 20, 25 minutes. Sam Darcy gets hurt, which nobody wanted to see, obviously. As one of the bright young stars of the game and super fun to watch. I was looking forward to seeing him play. He gets injured, and you kind of think as a fan, well, you don't want to see that, but that's probably an advantage to us, right? You take one of their best forwards out of the game. Surely that should be an advantage. They adjusted. We didn't. It's as simple as that. They moved the ball quicker. They were more direct. They went either long to the goal square, or they lowered their eyes and moved the ball fast through forward 50. And we just did not adapt to their change in strategy, their change in structure. Fraser went back to forward. They changed a bunch of things in terms of how they moved the ball. We know that they're an elite stoppage team, and they showed us that. But I think we thought that we were just about an elite stoppage team as well heading into this game. And those first 10 minutes kind of showed that. Just so disappointing. I can't really think of it. Despite the fact that I've got this word cloud of, 50 horrific words in front of me, disappointing is just the one that kind of rings true.
Yeah, I mean, most of them are pretty accurate. I mean, embarrassing, yes. Disappointing, yes. Predictable, I'd say no. That was probably the harsh part about it. Like, it wasn't predictable. I mean, it was interesting.
Well, except for the fact that, I think a lot of us, we kind of look at, there's a few teams that you look at these games in the lead up and go, well, this could be one of those games that we just...
deja vu element to it.
Yeah, exactly. It's happened a few times with the Dogs. There's the Bombers that it's happened with, and there's a couple of other teams that we tend to, or have a habit of dropping the bundle against. And
since we beat them in the elimination final in 2020, obviously the following year they beat us by 111. Then 2022, we played them on a Friday night. I was in Queensland and missed the game entirely. I was in the middle of the Daintree Forest. All I got was a text from a mate saying Saints have started badly. I think I saw the score at three-quarter time and we were 7 goals down or whatever. I think we only lost by 5 goals, but we were belted in that. And then we beat them by a fair bit in 23 in Ross's second game. Then they killed us last year and killed us again this year. So 4 of the last 5, they've just ripped us to shreds, which is disappointing. I mean, look, their midfield, similar to when Brisbane carved us late last year. Sides that are obviously very good at clearances if they get on top of us, but you've got to be able to resist that. You can lose clearances, you can lose the midfield. You just can't be totally uncompetitive. I mean, you give yourself. There are certain things that can happen in games where you've got no chance of winning, and that's one of them. Like if you give that much ball out of the middle, you can't possibly win. There's nothing else you can do. You're getting no inside 50s. You're getting no supply. You can't get it back off them. There's no pressure. So, you've just got to compete more than that. And it's funny, like quarter time's 5 minutes. It's amazing all of the things that go through your head during that time. I mean, we've got a Saints group and someone in it mentioned late in the first quarter saying, we're in front, but we look in trouble. And look, then you looked at some of the stats and you thought, well, we went inside 56 times in the first 15 minutes and kicked 4 goals, 1. So it's 5 shots from 6 entries. They went inside 17 times. So you're like, how long are you going to be able to sustain that? If you don't get more, if you don't get more of it, they'll get you eventually. Then you're weighing up, is that a positive because we actually didn't get that much ball? So if we just get the game back on an even keel, we're efficient enough that we'll win. Darcy's down, so that means Wilkie can peel off and intercept, which suits us. But I must admit, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling at quarter time that it wasn't actually going that well. The scoreboard kind of was, but the game wasn't. And then within 5 minutes of the second quarter starting, they found Norton twice at the top of the goal square. Bontempelli dropped one in from outside 50. Then they walked into an open goal straight out of the middle. And it was just out of control by then. And it's a strange feeling at quarter time to have that much concern, especially when the opposition's best player is out of the game.
Yeah. Well, I think both of those concepts and perspectives are true in some respect anyway. I think for that first 10 to 15 minutes, I thought we played quite well, and I thought that the scoreboard reflected that. I thought the Bulldogs still had a fair bit of the ball, but they fluffed around with it. They didn't do much with it. They weren't direct. They didn't seem to have much offensive structure. Yeah, even when they had the big guys up front, when they won the ball, they did a bit of the chipping around, and they didn't seem to be able to find any type of flow. And whether that was them just being rusty, bringing Bontempelli back into the middle, whether it was us and defensive pressure, I'm not quite sure. But when we had the ball, we attacked with precision. We were uber direct. We looked like we knew exactly what we were doing. But then when they kicked the last goal of the first, last goal of the first quarter. And at that point, I think there was a couple of minutes to go. And at that point, I think they started to control the ball a little more. Whereas before they won the ball and they'd muck around with it and they'd turn it over, we'd win it back and then go forward and score or have an opportunity to score. Whereas in those last few minutes, when they kicked that last goal of the first quarter, it did look like they were playing with more purpose. And they had kind of put it together to some respect. So, I think when the siren rang, there was a bit of, thank God the siren's gone. Like we can now regroup and kind of get our breath back because they're starting to get on top now. But also it was like, shit, they're starting to get on top now, and maybe this lead isn't very safe. And as you said, once you're 5 minutes into the second quarter, there was no lead, and all of a sudden it was, how far? Like, how quickly is this going to get out of control? And it was pretty quick, ultimately.
Yeah, was it 33 or 35 inside 50s to 11 at halftime? And then I remember, because your brain does funny things, so at halftime we're 28 points down, but had been absolutely smashed. So I remember thinking, they didn't absolutely kill us. Surely we're going to play better than that. we'd have to be a chance of eking that lead down a little bit if we can just get a bit of ball. And I think we kicked the first goal of the third quarter, and you thought, we're 21 points down or something. If we could be within 3 goals at 3-quarter time, you never know. But then that disappeared very quickly when they kicked 3 in 4 minutes or something. And obviously the Johannesson goal kind of summed up the night, where the Bulldogs got a free kick and they paid advantage, but neither player was sure. I think it was Bontempelli being chased by Burt, and forgive me if it wasn't Burns, but they both kind of half stopped to look at the umpire, but then Johannesson just took off, and it took us a second or two to realise, and by then he was gone, and kind of summed up the night that they were reacting a little bit quicker. We were slow, we were on the back foot, and it just sort of happened that way. I mean, really messy, minus 38 inside 50s. And I reckon that'd frustrate Ross. He spoke about getting 61 entries against the Giants, and we got, 30 or something against the Dogs. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think we had 31. They had 69 entries. Yeah. And it was just, he used the word mauling. I mean, that was a mauling, really. They just about demolished us in just about every kind of key metric that you can think of. And you said at the top, if you can't get your hands on the ball and they're dominating stoppages, it's all well and good that you score when you go forward, but you have to be so efficient that you're scoring every time when you go forward. And we're just not, we're not that team. We can do that in patches. But against a team that is dominating you through the middle and across half back, we couldn't afford a single turnover. And I think we end up having more turnovers and less tackles than they did. They're a pretty good team. Like, let's not take all the credit, right? Like, they're a pretty good team. I think it was just, for whatever reason, we just couldn't handle them. And like I said, there's a bunch of kind of reasons or trying to justify whether it's, the heat the week before, whether it's whatever, it doesn't really matter. But, it's going to be a task this week for Ross and Harves and Corey Enright and those guys to try and turn this around. Because that was a beatdown. And they've got to try and kind of get over this as quickly as possible and move on and turn up again to face the reigning premiers. It doesn't get any easier.
Yeah, look, I mean, I said, your brain puts things, processes them and deals with them in whatever way it needs to. And look, I look at it and go, pretty much every side in the comp has had an absolute stinker at one point or another this year. Not all of them. I mean, Collingwood, round one, Hawthorn was 70 points behind Port at half time last week. It happens, and it's how you respond. You don't want it to happen, and you've obviously got to bridge that gap between your best and your worst, but that doesn't have to define us any more than the Geelong or Port win does. It's only temporary. You play 6 or 7 days later, and then you're judged again. It's another test, and under the microscope of a side with a good midfield, and I know I've spoken on a couple of other podcasts that I think the Bulldogs are a pretty sharp side. Not that matters too much, because obviously you want to be able to play in that space. So I think we're better than that, but we didn't show it. And the glaring issue is some of those leaders. And I guess that Bontempelli, superstar, so it's hard to judge by comparison to that, but he misses a couple of months, comes back in and looks like he's a Brownlow medalist straight away. We've got Liam Henry, who plays 3 games in the twos, then he's not ready on week 4, then he's not ready on week 5 because he can't get near it. So you got Marshall, who still looks underdone from round 1, Jack Steele, who looks underdone from 3 weeks ago, guys that take 5 weeks to get over 2-week injuries, and it's frustrating, and you're just sitting there thinking, well, what is it that – because Bond's probably a bad example because you look at that level of player, but the fact that he was able to come back seamlessly like that and look like he hadn't missed a beat, and I'm like, what are we missing here? Like, why is it taking so long?
I had that exact same thought, and I think for anyone listening, you probably think that we got together and spoke about this before we chatted, but we didn't. But I had this exact thought, in the second half, thinking, I know the guy's a class act, like he's one of the best players in the competition, but how this can happen almost every week, where you get a guy who's missed 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks, comes straight back into the team and dominates. Whether it's getting 30 touches and kicking a few, or playing up forward, kicking 5 or 6. Like, it tends to happen so often against us. And no conspiracy theories. It is what it is. But why is it so hard for our guys to get up to speed? Why is it so hard for Jack Steele, who was meant to miss a week with an innocuous, knock at training that turned into a little niggle pre-game, a month ago, and then missed a number of weeks with that little innocuous niggle, and it hasn't looked an AFL player since he got back. I mean, the guy, I love Jack Steele as much as the next person. He's been one of my favourite players of the last, 5-6 years. Deservedly so. I mean, he's been a star, and he's carried this team on his back for a number of those years, but he just doesn't look up to it at the moment. He doesn't look at AFL level. He doesn't look like an AFL standard player, let alone an AFL captain at the moment. And I don't know what's happened there. Liam Henry didn't look like an AFL standard player on Sunday night. And like you said, he's played 3 games in the twos. Why is it so hard? Huh? What are we doing wrong?
Yeah, and I think that was a lot of the frustration that did come out of that. And, you get senior players who are trying to set examples, and you get, Brad Hill getting run down twice. Look, good on him for taking it on and that sort of thing. But it's, level heads and smartness and discipline and things like that are required in that situation. I guess before we wrap that with the votes and look ahead to Brisbane, do you have a one word that you would either take from that list or summarise yourself to put a bow on that?
Yeah, I think my word during the last quarter, I think, was putrid. But I think, and that was more of the anger and the sadness. I think it's now disappointing. Like I said at the top, it's disappointing that that's the type of performance that we put up in what could and should have been a bit of a landmark game for us. Standalone game, essentially prime time, long weekend, event weekend, all that type of stuff. It was our opportunity, especially after the North game, to kind of, put our foot down and say we deserve to play in some of these big games. And we didn't. We didn't show it, and we didn't turn up for whatever reason. And yeah, just it's like, that feeling you get as a kid when your parents say, "I'm not even angry. I'm not mad. I'm just disappointed." That's how I feel. I feel like these are my kids, and I'm not mad anymore. I'm just disappointed in them.
Yeah, and for me, it was probably deflating. Would probably be the word, in that, it doesn't. It's not so much about the respect of everybody else. It doesn't matter that much, but it kind of does, in the sense that I feel genuinely like at times the club has been a bit disrespected in terms of where they stand. And I still believe that to be the case. But then you come out and do that on the big stage, and it's like, well, I can't defend you if you're going to do that. Like, I can't. There's nothing I can say. They're going to smash you, and they're right. And it's disappointing. Like, obviously, you want to win games and play finals more than you care about what somebody thinks in the media. But I genuinely believe some of those comments have been naive, head in the sand, haven't watched enough footy. We had a shocker, which teams do, and those people who just pop their head up from whatever they're doing, which isn't watching games, and look at the score and go, "Oh, see, I told you they were shit."
Yeah, told you. Yeah.
And there's nothing you can say about it until you get the opportunity again. And it's like, well, you kind of feel like you're on the journey with them. There's not a lot we can do about it, but they're trying to put things in place, and then that happens, and you're like, it's just you've let yourself down in many ways. Like, it's not about me, whatever. But yeah, I guess they're better than that. So. Yeah,
I think we're better than that too. And I think, looking at it a few days later and trying to be rational about it, we are a young, inexperienced team. We've got some guys at the higher end of the age scale, and we've got a bunch of guys at the lower end of the age scale and experience scale. We don't have a huge amount of regular, reliable, consistent guys in that middle bracket, that kind of 24 to 28 range that we can rely on. week after week. And so I think that's where we fall down. But I think that we're going to have good weeks and bad weeks ultimately. And that's what inexperienced, inconsistent, young, developing footy teams do. And, we've kind of got a benchmark of what we should and could do when we put it all together. We've had some bloody good wins this year already. We're heading into round 7. We've beaten Geelong, preliminary finalists from last year. We beat Port in Adelaide. There's some good wins there, and there's some green shoots, and there's plenty to be excited about. We've got a centre half back who had essentially never played there before, who's made some mistakes, yes, but essentially equipping himself pretty handily. And we've got some young kids coming through, showing us what they can do and showing us that they belong. But we need to start putting these things together consistently. And developing teams don't have that capacity generally. There are some anomalies. We saw the second half of the season last year with Hawthorn as a developing team. They just got on a roll. We've seen it with our teams, over the years, 97, 04, you get on a roll and you get some momentum and some belief and confidence and all those sorts of things. And you can do some pretty special things, but that's the outlier. That's not generally what happens. And I think that we're going to have some more disappointing losses, but I think we're also going to have some inspiring wins over the journey. And I still think, despite the anger on Sunday night and the disappointment since, I still think we're on the right track. I think we're doing the right things. I think we're putting the structures in place to be a pretty good football team and to be a pretty good organization. And I think now, more than ever, the fans, the supporters, the members have to stick the course,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's 100% spot on. Like, it's a kick in the teeth, but it's how you respond. I mean, as Ross has mentioned with the draw a few times, we're 3-3. We've played 3 of last year's preliminary finalists. We've played 3 games in Adelaide. We've got the reigning premiers this week. It's been a fairly relentlessly difficult draw. Another finalist in the Dogs, an emerging Crow side that looks a chance to finish top 4. So it hasn't been easy, and we've done it in the face of injuries. We're 3-3. Our most recent performance was horrific, but the body of work before that, pretty decent. So I still think if you assess it in the light of day, we've looked okay. We just failed a test. So there'll be another one this week. It's interesting when you look at Brisbane, sort of skipping ahead to that. I think they've won something like 7 in a row against us. But with the exception of late last year when they killed us at Marvel, we've been pretty competitive. They usually beat us by between 2 and 4 goals, somewhere in that vicinity. So it kind of feels like they give you a bit of a sniff. It's a shame they lost last week because their form was sort of iffy. They were finding ways to win based on their talent. But last week was probably a kick in the teeth for them. So that's probably not ideal timing. But
you did feel like they were kind of gettable. But having had the loss, which is kind of the loss that they might have needed.
Have one of them eventually, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of that game as well, Unplugged is proud to partner with Ticketverse for the 2025 AFL season. Get premium seats at Marvel Stadium's Medallion Club for St Kilda games with exclusive access to fine dining, bars and more. Visit ticketverse.com.au to explore your options. Tickets sorted. That is a 1:20 Saturday game. Jump on YouTube and channel and hit subscribe. Get all of the notifications when our stuff goes live and on all of our podcast channels. Wrapping that with our votes. Of course, H isn't here, but he's given 2 votes to Kel Wilkie, 2 to Mitch Owens, 2 to Jack Higgins, and 1 each to Nass, McRae, Garcia, and Wilson. I was probably on a similar line of thinking there. I gave Kel Wilkie 4 votes. I thought he held up our defence extremely well. I gave 2 votes to the 2 forwards. I thought 30 inside 50s I thought Higgins kicked 3 goals too late, 6 tackles inside 50, the most of any player on the ground from limited entries. He's continuing good form, so he got 2, and Mitch Owens kicked 3 from very limited chances and was a constant source of pressure. So they get 2 votes simply by virtue of the fact they both did their job. That's hard to question. Gave 1 to Nass. I know he had some critics because at times, he turned the ball over, but he didn't have a lot to kick to. There were times where he would just sprint down the ground and there'd be nothing on and he'd barrel it forward, and yes, they'd get it back, but I'm not sure you can do too
He had no one to go to in that one where he was streaming forward. He had no one to kick to. There was no one there.
Yeah, that's right. And I gave 1 vote to Windhager, who I thought battled reasonably hard on Richards and got a bit of it himself. Honourable mention to Garcia, who was a little bit stiff. But that's how I sorted mine. Nick, your 10?
Pretty similar. I gave 1 to Higgins, Windhager, Naz, Owens, and Garcia. Garcia likes playing the doggies, doesn't he? I think he came on as a sub in that smashing last year, and it was pretty handy for 40 minutes or whatever it was. I think he showed more in this game against the Tide than he has in some of the previous games, even when we've been better as a team. I don't know what that says about him or us, but just interesting to note. Owens, like you said, I thought was good forward pressure. Started the game like a rabid dog. It was just in everything up forward, crashing packs, taking marks, kicking goals. It looked like one of those games where when that forward is on and all you have to do is just kick it in their vicinity and they'll go do something with it. Unfortunately, we didn't get our hands on the ball enough to kick it to him that much from the rest of the game after the first 10 minutes. But I thought he was handy for the most part. Naz, like you said, I thought he worked hard, made some blues, still has a bit of that poor decision making in him, but I don't think that barrel forward was one of them. I think he was just out of options. Windhager, I thought, tried really hard, and I think that he's becoming more consistent in his play, which is nice to see, because he's been one, I think, over the journey so far over the last few years where he'd have 2 or 3 good games and then he'd have 4 or 5 stinkers, and you wouldn't get much out of him. But I think he's been pretty consistent this season so far, and looking forward to him kind of cementing his spot in the middle. Higgins, like you said, is just dangerous. He makes things happen, and has been very impressive to start the season. I gave Cal Wilkie 5 votes. I thought he was, if not for Marcus Bontempelli, Cal Wilkie might have been the best player on the field. He was, without a doubt, our best player, but he was in the top 3 players on the field, despite playing in defence on a team that lost by 12 goals. Rarely puts a foot wrong. The only reason he doesn't get more than 5, in my opinion, is just the volume of ball that came in at him was just overwhelming. But I honestly could have given him man of the match in all respects, except for the fact that Marcus Bontempelli was on the field. He's that good. He's that good.
Yeah, and look, I think he built on it. Last week he showed some good signs, and the week before he showed some good signs, and really built on that. And segueing into, because you might pop up again through all of these, but your Jason Blake Award.
Yeah, well, just on that, I still think Cal Wilkie's underrated. I know he's an All-Australian. I know he's now a best and fairest winner. He's vice captain. He's a leader at the footy club. I still think around the rest of the competition, Cal Wilkie is underrated. And I don't know what he has to do or how he has to do it to get the flowers that he deserves. But he is, in every respect except the plaudits, a superstar. And he deserves the credit for that.
Yeah, I think, he hasn't missed a game since debut. I think he's top 3 in the AFL at the moment for continuous games. He's constantly gets a lot of the footy, he marks everything, he intercepts, he reads the play well. He's captained the side in Jack's absence. So he's done basically all there is to do. So it's hard to argue with that. A guy who, again, I thought battled pretty hard, and sort of haven't mentioned him here, but he won a few one-on-ones when we weren't winning many one-on-ones, and I think he keeps holding his own, is Liam Stocker. I thought he was okay again. at times it was difficult. Most players probably had moments where they were beaten, but I thought he at least had a dip. And, I hate that expression because they all did. It just sometimes it looks that way. But, particularly in his case, he sort of, knuckled down for the task. Probably a little bit easier to find. The Shannon Knoll Award this week.
Well, it could have been just about anyone, really. I've gone with a group, and it's quite a large group ultimately, and that is the senior leaders. I think there's probably only a couple. And Cal Wilkie, I think Mason Wood kept trying. Not many others kind of put their best foot forward. I thought McRae tried, but was just kind of against the tide. When it's tough to get your hands on the ball, it's tough to get your hands on the ball, whether you're Jack McRae or Ryan Burns. It doesn't really matter. But the senior leaders as a whole need to put their hand up, and that's from the playing group. They either need to put their hand up, and if they're selected, they've got to go out there and find some of that white line fever and go and get the job done. They've got to go fly the flag. And if they're named, if they're out there on the field, they have to turn up. That's their job, not just as professional footballers, but as leaders, bringing the young kids along, of teaching them the way to go about it. Right now, they're not doing that. Secondly, from a coaching perspective, the senior leaders of the football club, not from a playing perspective, but a football organisation perspective, that is the senior coaches. If we have guys that aren't ready, that aren't fit, that aren't capable of being out on the field and performing at a level that's acceptable, then don't pick them. If they're not healthy, if they're not fit, if they're banged up and they can't play, don't play them. Doesn't matter if you're Jack Steele and you're the captain. If you're not fit, don't play him. Doesn't matter if you're Liam Henry and you've played 3 or 4 games in the twos. If you're not fit and you're not ready, don't play him. I'd rather see Hugh Boxall out there and get his opportunity and crack in the middle for 2.5 quarters before his tank expires, but at least go in and have a crack, than see some of these older guys who I love and who have been great servants, but run around as if they're geriatrics on walking frames, unable to cover the ground, unable to tackle, unable to run and spread, unable to carry, unable to kick, unable to do the things that's what they're there for. So I want more than anybody to see a fit and healthy Jack Steele out there, fit and healthy Liam Henry out there, fit and healthy Rowan Marshall out there. But if they're not fit and healthy, if they're not able to perform, don't play them. And play a kid who can.
Yeah, and I'll reiterate that it's hard for this award to pick 1 or 2 individuals. You could pick 14 blokes for various reasons. You could pick individual contests. You could say, I want Burns to get more of the footy. I want Hill to not layer eyes as much. I want, Caminiti to, find the body a little bit, not kick the ball inboard backwards and turn it over and all of that sort of stuff. But yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think it's a collective thing. So at times I pulled myself up thinking, is it harsh to say that Liam Henry's got to find a way to get himself out there? You can't help getting injured, but you're like, who is there an element of preparation? Is there an element of management? Is there an element of all of that combined? But yeah, ultimately it's been difficult in terms of selection to see guys get picked on Thursday, pulled out on Friday, guys dropped on Friday, then just come in for apparently no reason on Sunday. And I'm sure there is logic behind that. They probably wanted Hasty to get a full game. He'd been subbed for 4 weeks and all of that type of stuff. And Jones had gastro, so they probably pulled him out because they thought he was sick and then he was okay. So I get it, but we don't know that. We've got to join the dots and figure it out sort of ourselves. And you're right, like if Jack Steele and Rowan Marshall are still carrying something, why? Why can't we get rid of it? And if they are carrying something, yeah, it hurts that they won't be there and it hampers us, but it hampers us if they're injured playing. So you've got to then weigh that up and say Max Heath or Harry Boyd or whatever else versus a half-fit Rowan Marshall, Jack Steele's leadership but on one leg versus Boxall on debut. We're prepared to take those risks as fans and have a look. If Jack Steele misses 2 more and it means he plays the rest of the year at 95%, not 70%, fine. Just figure it out. It's frustrating when you get players missing game after game after game after game, but we'll live with it if they come back and they're all right. I mean, we're living with Max King. And this week's going to be interesting. Dougal Howard a test. I mean, it sounds like they'll probably pick him straight away, and I understand that, and it looks like he's rehabbed pretty well, and it feels like that'll work, and we kind of need the height. That's where Clark would be interesting. Does he come straight in, or does he play twos? Carroll will definitely play twos. Filippo now a week or two away, so if he's available next week, and Ross has mentioned that game quite a few times, the Freo game, does he come straight back in, or does he play twos? Don't know, but you just hope they get all of that stuff right. So, from there, I get, yeah.
Oh, it's funny. I feel like we spoke about this a couple of weeks ago that from an organizational perspective, I think we are doing a lot right. As a club, as a business, as an organization. But this is the one thing that it just feels like there's something off, and I don't. Ross got a bit testy about it when he was asked at the presser post game about some of the conspiracy theories around players missing and Max and hiding the truth and all that type of stuff, and that's fine, but it does feel like there's something a little off. It does feel like there's something a little, whether it's with our recovery strategy, whether it's with our training data, whether it's with selection strategy. I don't know what it is. Obviously, we're not inside the four walls to know what that is. I'll take Ross at face value. Excuse me, at face value when he says that they're not hiding, existing issues and injuries with guys and whatever. Fine, I'll believe him. But there is something that's not working in what they're doing, and I don't know where it is, but something's not working.
Now look, Geelong tell fibs all the time with their injury list. They have late withdrawals in every game. We're not alone. Fine. Just let us in on the strategy. That's, I think that's probably all we would look at this situation. But turn our attention to Brisbane. So similar, Kyle Lohmann comes back. Who's going to be pretty important to their forward structure. He's missed the last 3 weeks. Apart from that, obviously they're still adjusting to life post Joe Danaher. They've won 5 in a row before last week when they were pretty vulnerable. They could have lost any of the games they'd played really before that, but, being the talented, resilient side they are, coming from behind, they find ways to win, and, they're going to seriously come at us, you would imagine, but there's no reason for us not to be fired up. And again, you don't just flick a switch and find form because you lose a game. So if there's some vulnerabilities in what they're doing, then they can be exploited. I actually feel slightly more confident about this game than I did about the Dogs. Now, that doesn't mean I think we'll win. It's just I've been a bit spooked by those Bulldogs beltings and what their midfield has done to us a couple of times. And Brisbane are a better side than the Bulldogs, but they're a different side to the Bulldogs. And sometimes that's what it is. It's different matchups and different circumstances. So I'm really keen to see how we respond. Like in the last couple of days, I've thought more about just be good to see on Saturday what we do in response to that. Do we fly the flag? Do we take it up to them? Do we pull off a meritorious victory like we did in round 2 after what happened in round 1? It's always nice to play the reigning premiers. Our record against the reigning premiers, insert team here, isn't too bad. Like we've beat Collingwood last year as the reigning premiers. We've done it a few times. Geelong, we beat them as reigning premiers as well. So it doesn't necessarily mean it's impossible, but yeah, I'm keen to see how we shape up. Do you think Dougal Howard plays?
I don't think he'll come straight back in. I think he'll have 1 week in the twos and then come in. But it does.
Ricky and Amos or whatever the week after.
Yeah, it does worry me, the height thing. I think the Dogs took advantage of it, and I think Brisbane will try to. The midfield's the worry. I think if we can break even in the middle, then I think that we can. We've seen our guys compete with Brisbane in the air a number of times, and I think that we've seen some strategies and structures work against their tools. We saw Cooper Sharman play a defensive role on Harris Andrews a little while ago, and that works pretty well. But I am worried with our current forward setup on what Harris Andrews might be able to do against this team, especially if the Lions midfield gets off the chain again, as the Bulldogs did, and we're kind of our only ability to get it forward is kind of chaos ball and scrappy kicks out of the middle, boom or bust type thing, then I think Harris Andrews might have a field day. But yeah, I don't know. Look, it might be one where you swing someone like Caminiti forward for periods to try and shake things up. I don't think the tall forward structure is quite working for Brisbane just yet. And I think that they can be. I don't think they're an elite forward line. Let's put it that way. I don't think they're an elite forward line, and I think that they win games of footy because they have elite talent, just about everywhere else on the field. I think they've got enough creativity in the forward line to get over the fact that they don't have elite key forwards. Your Loman in is handy for them, kind of a little bit like Riley Sanders was on Sunday night. Can be pretty dangerous. But I'm worried about the fact that if we can't get our hands on the ball in the middle, then it could be another thumping.
Which is what happened last year, and that was a bit of an outlier in the back end of the season for us, and an outlier in recent games with Brisbane. But yeah, that's what happens when they got on top of us. McInerney was able to compete well with Marshall, and then I think early in the third quarter there was 14-1 centre clearances, and there was actually a Bronx cheer when we won one. I remember that being at the game. So yeah, that was one of them. I put a tweet out the other day about wipeouts in the middle, and that was one of the 4, I think, under Ross Lyon that we've had. But the others were the second half against Freo last year at Marvel, and then the Carlton game in 23 when we were 4 goals up at half time and lost by about the same margin, where they smashed us in the middle in the second half. So yeah, hopefully that midfield has had some tough conversations about competing. And Windhager, who didn't play at the end of last year, does he go to Neil again, or Neil's a bit out of form, so does he go to McCluggage or
Ashcroft
or not one of the Ashcrofts, Will, the older of the Ashcrofts, and go from there? I mean, McCluggage hurts us a bit on the outside. And then get your matchups right on their smalls with Cameron and Archie and Lohman, and obviously that's where Webster and Stocker and these sorts of players are going to have some important jobs to do. Burns will probably get one of them. So, yeah.
Well, Webster's done a pretty good job on Cameron in the past. I think aside from the couple of performances that you mentioned, I think we do actually compete pretty well with Brisbane.
Yeah.
We haven't had the success against them, but I think we have matched up on them and competed with them fairly well, especially in some of those one-on-one key matchups. I think Ross mentioned it a number of times in his presser that the midfield stoppage performance, whether it was centre bounce or around the ground, was not part of our DNA. That is not how we play. It's not how we've played so far this year, and that he thinks it was just poor execution. They got on top of us and it was hard for us to claw it back for whatever reason. But he seemed pretty confident that they have the right structure and the right planning methods to win midfield battles most weeks. So you would imagine that there, like you said, was going to be there going to be some harsh words said during the week, and probably a fair bit of owning that performance from the likes of Steele and McRae to some extent, Jones, and some of the other guys in there, especially the older guys. I don't know, this is going to sound like I'm going around in circles. I'd be shocked if we put up as poor a performance in the middle 2 weeks in a row, but it also wouldn't shock me if Brisbane still were able to gain the ascendancy in there by the end of the game and make that count on the scoreboard, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does, and we're going to have to be efficient again. So, look, it's a very difficult game, and we're the underdogs, but I think we're a chance. As I said, I think our body of work over the year says we're a chance. Last week does not, but the the month prior to that would. So hopefully it's a little bit closer to that mark. A couple of our listener questions. A reminder also that we caught up with Max Hudson over the last couple of weeks. Ripping fella, so that chat will float somewhere soon. So keep an eye out for that one with Big Max, a 200-game defender, the favourite son of the club. There weren't too many Saints fans that didn't have him amongst their favourites through his time in footy. So, we'll be hearing from Max over the next few days, hopefully. But looking at a couple of listener questions, Ricky sort of asking what we've discussed a little bit, why so many underdone players. And Lachlan says, sell St Kilda to me as a free agent because after tonight, apart from cash, why would you come? I think, Lachlan, if I was to sit down and pitch in front of you, I would say that a lot of what we've done over the last couple of years has been through youth. So I'd sit there and say, start of 2023, when we were severely depleted at the start of the year, we unearthed kids in Owens, Early, Caminiti, Windhager, these sorts of guys who showed quite a bit. Filippo, then last year it was Wilson. This year it's Travalia, and Garcia's pushed on a little bit, and these sorts of guys. And we're confident that, we're bringing enough of those guys through, and we're confident that there's still some quality. We haven't seen the best of Max King and those sorts of things yet. So, and I'd say that, look, every side's had shockers, and, we're learning and trying to get better together. So I still think there's a decent enough message to sell. And just reiterating the point that most of the players that have opted not to come to St Kilda, they just opted not to leave their club. The big difference between a player leaving and saying, I'm not going to play for St Kilda, I'm going to go to Essendon instead, or just saying, no, I'm going to stay at North Melbourne because this is home, which is a respectable decision, and good on players that do that. It's disappointing. You'd love to have Finn Callaghan say to the Giants, I'm going to the Saints, or that'd be fantastic. But good on them for not doing that. I think the game's probably better off that when players don't leave. But yeah, we're not having players choose other clubs over us. We're just having players not leave. So I think that's a really important distinction.
I think the other part of that is that I think what we're seeing now is that we're seeing us targeting players, and obviously we only know of some, right? We probably don't hear the stories of 75% of these targets and conversations and discussions and chases of free agents or whatever. But, it certainly feels like, looking from an outsider looking in, that we are chasing the right type of players. We're not just chasing players for the sake of throwing cash at someone and spending the salary cap. It's we're looking. We've identified profiles of the type of players and the type of people that we want in our footy club, and we're going after those players. And I feel like part of the makeup of those players is sometimes what keeps those players from leaving. Mm-hmm. If you look at the personality and the makeup of two of those guys that you mentioned, Callaghan and LDU, they're stand-up people. They're quality footballers. They're competitive midfield beasts, big bodies, exactly the type of player that we want in our midfield. But also, from a character makeup, person, human perspective, seems like they're really stand-up human beings as well, and that loyalty and wanting to build something with their mates and their families and all that sort of thing is important to them. I hope that when the time comes that our guys, and we're seeing one play out at the moment, are being chased, that, we have some of those guys on our list. And, you hope Naz makes that decision come the end of the year. You hope over the next few years that guys like, Owens and Filippo and whatever are going to make similar decisions because they want to build something with their mates and their teammates and our St Kilda family here.
Yeah, and I think it's hard to get players out of clubs unless there's a go-home factor. Like, I'm confident we'll keep Nas. Look, Tom de Koning's looking pretty likely based on the volume of the contract and all of that type of stuff. And the other ones you hear are Leeka Lear and Miles Bergman. Port have just put a massive offer in front of Bergman, so who knows what happens there. But, if the moment's right and you lure people home, I mean, Bergman's got the Bayside link and all of that type of stuff, and de Koning offers a Godfather type deal. But we'll see what happens with all of that. But yeah, I still think we're a sellable destination in terms of, it's funny to say we're not a basket case because we played like one on Sunday, but we're not a basket case. As I said, you said it before, I think we're a well-run club, well-organised. Our recruiting's been pretty good. We just had not a few stinkers, probably one or two stinkers in the last couple of years, and hopefully we see the back of them soon enough, but they've popped up every now and then. So if we can just squish them and get them out of our system.
It's funny to say, but I also think, because he's a bit of a polarizing figure, but I think Ross Lyon is a sellable asset for our football club. I don't think that there are many footballers in the AFL and even past football. Like, I don't think there's a lot of commentary about Ross Lyon being a bad coach, whether from players or former coaches. I think just about anyone who's in the industry who has played the game or has coached the game says that Ross Lyon is a superstar coach. Now, it doesn't mean that you're always going to win a flag, but no one's gotten closer than him on multiple occasions and not had one. And I don't think that really any of those issues, we've talked about this ad nauseum over the years, I don't think any of those grand final losses were Ross Lyon's fault. He is a very valuable asset when selling our footy club to a potential free agent because he's the type of coach that when he wants you in his team. And he's a coach that gets the most out of his guys. And everyone who's played under him, whether they liked him and got on well with him, just about all of his players respected him for that very reason, that he'll do everything possible to get the best out of them.
Yeah, and again, I trust the message. Obviously, Sunday night was pretty average. Got up Easter Monday, took the dog for a walk again in the morning, put the presser in the ears, and again, you felt a little bit better listening to it. You expect them to know because they're coaches and it's their job to know, but he spent, generally Ross's pressers, the first 3 minutes of it is him on a long monologue explaining the game, and then the questions follow. The first question will be something like, Ross, what did you make of that? And then he goes off on the full game summary. And it makes sense. He explained why you lose, what happened, where it happened, how it happened, different things they tried to do to fix it, how the Bulldogs countered it, and why it fell apart and why it frustrates them and what they're going to do about it. And you get all of that in the start, and you're like, okay, fair enough. So it doesn't mean you fix it. I mean, as you always say, you can study the opposition, you know how to beat them and all that sort of stuff, but it's getting it done. But I always listen to those pressers thinking, oh, yeah, they're across it. They know what's happening. We'll see what happens. So, yeah, the therapeutic aspect of the presser was in play again. But that'll wrap us up for this week. As we said, stay tuned for Max Hudson soon enough. That's in the can, just some editing touches on that, and it'll be ready to go. So, that'll be a nice one, and good reaction to Heath Black, who was very honest last week with a lot of things about his interesting career, and that was pretty well received. So we got a few more in the pipeline that we'll hopefully bring for you soon enough. But a reminder, of course, about Unplugged's partnership with Ticketverse for the 2025 AFL season. Get premium seats at Marvel Stadium's Medallion Club for St Kilda games with exclusive access to fine dining, bars and more. The likes of Eric Banner and Andrew Bassett were in that exact vicinity where some of the seats that we've been in a position to give away have been. So visit ticketverse.com.au to explore your options. Tickets, they've got you sorted. So we take on the reigning premiers this week, and what a way that would be to respond by knocking them off at Marvel. Go Saints.